Your doctor prescribed it, your pharmacy filled it, and it's quietly erasing your memory. Right now, tens of millions of Americans over 60 are taking medications every single day that are crossing into their brain, damaging neurons, blocking critical neurotransmitters, and accelerating cognitive decline. Not as a rare side effect, as a documented, measurable, peer-reviewed consequence, and most of them have no idea it's happening because nobody told them. Here's the story of a woman named Carol, 63 years old, retired school teacher, took 5 medications every morning, every one of them prescribed by a doctor she trusted completely. And for 2 years, Carol blamed herself for a memory that was slipping away, when the real cause was sitting in her medicine cabinet the entire time. By the end of this video, you'll know all 9 medications, what they're doing inside the brain, and the exact questions to ask your doctor this week to protect your memory. Let's get into Carol's story because it's probably more familiar than you think. Carol taught 4th grade for 31 years. She was the kind of teacher who remembered every student's birthday, every parent's name, every small detail that made a classroom feel like a community. Memory was, in a very real sense, her professional skill. So when that skill started slipping in retirement, it didn't feel like a minor inconvenience. It felt like losing a piece of who she was. Carol's trouble started small. She'd misplace her keys. She'd forget a name mid-conversation. Someone she'd known for 30 years. She'd reread the same paragraph in a book 3 times and still not absorb it. She assumed it was just age. Her mother had gone the same way at roughly the same point in life, so Carol figured this was simply her turn. She started leaving notes for herself on the refrigerator. She started avoiding phone calls because she was embarrassed by the gaps in conversation. She told her daughter it was just getting older, so often that she started believing it herself. It was her daughter, visiting for a weekend, who first noticed something didn't add up. Carol had always been sharp, the kind of person who finished crossword puzzles in pen, who could recite the names of every student in every class photo lining her hallway. Now she was struggling with simple word recall mid-sentence, multiple times in a single afternoon. That wasn't normal aging. That was something else. Her daughter, a nurse, asked one question that changed everything. "Mom, what exactly are you taking every day?" Carol pulled out 5 orange bottles from the medicine cabinet and lined them up on the counter. 5 medications. 5 different prescribing dates going back as far as 9 years. None of them reviewed together ever by anyone. But here's what nobody had explained to Carol and what almost nobody explains to anyone over 60. Your blood-brain barrier weakens with age. Think of it as a filter. It's supposed to keep harmful substances out of your brain. At 30, that filter is tight. At 65, it becomes significantly more permeable. Drugs that bounced off that barrier when Carol was 40 were now passing straight through it. And once a drug crosses into the brain, it interferes with the chemical signals your neurons use to communicate, to consolidate memories, and simply to stay alive and functioning. There's a second piece to this, and it compounds the first. After 60, your kidneys and liver clear medications more slowly than they used to. That means drugs stay in your system longer, at higher effective concentrations, for longer than the label or the original dosing guidance ever accounted for. Carol's doctor wasn't wrong to prescribe what she'd prescribed. Every medication Carol took was treating something real: high blood pressure, acid reflux, occasional insomnia, seasonal allergies, mild anxiety after her husband passed. Each individual prescription made sense on its own, written by a careful and competent physician at a specific moment in time. But nobody had ever sat down and looked at all 5 together. Nobody had asked whether her risk profile at 63 looked different than it did at 45, when the first of these prescriptions was originally written. That conversation almost never happens at the pharmacy counter, and it hadn't happened for Carol either, until her daughter's question sent her looking for answers that weekend. Here are the 9 medications Carol eventually learned about. See how many of them sound familiar in your own medicine cabinet. Number 1. Anticholinergics, Benadryl, and bladder medications like Detrol and Ditropan. Carol took Benadryl most nights, not for allergies, just because it made her drowsy and a friend had recommended it years ago for sleep. It became such a habit that she stopped thinking of it as medication at all. It was just part of her nightly routine, the same way brushing her teeth was. These drugs block acetylcholine, the primary neurotransmitter involved in memory and learning. A study published in JAMA Internal Medicine followed over 3,000 adults for 7 years and found that long-term anticholinergic use was associated with a significantly increased risk of dementia. The more doses taken over time, the higher the risk. And this category includes far more than prescription drugs. Even over-the-counter Benadryl, taken nightly the way Carol had been taking it for years, falls squarely into this category. Number 2. Proton pump inhibitors. Prilosec, Nexium, Prevacid. Carol had been on one of these for acid reflux for nearly a decade. Her doctor renewed the prescription every year without much discussion. A quick checkbox during an otherwise busy annual physical, the kind of renewal that happens almost automatically once a medication has been working fine for years. Pi-P is reduced stomach acid, and they're among the most prescribed drugs in America. But research published in JAMA Neurology found that regular PPI users had a 44% higher risk of dementia compared to non-users. The likely mechanism: PP is reduced vitamin B12 absorption, and over time that may allow amyloid beta, the toxic protein linked to Alzheimer's, to accumulate in the brain. Number 3. Benzodiazepines Xanax, Valium, Ativan. After her husband passed, Carol's doctor prescribed a low dose of Xanax for anxiety. It helped genuinely and immediately during one of the hardest periods of her life. She kept taking it long after the acute grief had eased because it was working and nobody had suggested otherwise. These drugs work by sedating your central nervous system. A landmark study in the British Medical Journal found that benzodiazepine users had a 51% increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. The longer the use, the higher the risk. This is also a medication you should never stop abruptly after long-term use. Doing so can be genuinely dangerous, and it requires a doctor's supervision. Number 4. Statins, Lipitor, Crestor, Zocor. This one is more controversial than the others. Statins lower cholesterol, including cholesterol in the brain, where it's actually essential for nerve function and synapse repair. A study in the journal Pharmacotherapy found that some patients on lipophilic statins, the kind that cross the blood-brain barrier, reported significant memory problems that reversed once they stopped the medication. If you're on a statin, it's worth asking your doctor whether your specific one is known to cross into the brain. Number 5. Beta blockers. Metoprolol, Atenolol. Carol took one of these for blood pressure, alongside everything else. She'd been on it for the better part of 15 years, since well before any memory concerns had started, and it had never once come up as a possible contributor. Certain beta blockers are lipophilic, meaning they dissolve in fat and cross the blood-brain barrier easily. Research suggests these particular beta blockers can cause brain fog, low mood, and slower cognitive processing in some seniors. If you're on one, ask your doctor whether a hydrophilic alternative, one that doesn't cross into the brain at all, might work just as well for you. Number 6. Sleep aids, Ambien, Lunesta. Here's the cruel irony, and it's one Carol lived through directly without ever connecting the dots. For a period after her husband passed, she'd taken Ambien on the worst nights, alongside everything else already in her system. It felt like the responsible choice. Better than lying awake for hours, she reasoned. These medications are taken to help the brain recover overnight, but research published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society found that seniors taking these drugs had a dramatically increased risk of falls, accidents, and cognitive decline. They suppress the deep, slow-wave sleep your brain depends on to flush out toxic proteins overnight. The medication taken to produce sleep ends up blocking the exact kind of sleep that protects memory. Carol was essentially fighting her own recovery without knowing it. Number 7. Antihistamines. Zyrtec, Claritin, and older Benadryl-style products. Newer antihistamines like Claritin and Zyrtec are considered relatively low risk for this particular concern, but older first-generation antihistamines are strongly anticholinergic, the same mechanism as medication number 1. They cross the blood-brain barrier and block acetylcholine directly. If you take an antihistamine regularly, it's worth checking which generation it belongs to. The difference between the two categories is significant, even though they sit side by side on the same pharmacy shelf. Number 8. Opioid painkillers. Vicodin, Oxycodone, Percocet. Opioids bind to receptors throughout the brain. Beyond the well-known addiction risk, research shows they impair memory consolidation and reduce neuroplasticity. A study in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society found that older adults on long-term opioids showed significantly worse cognitive performance than matched non-users. Number 9. Certain blood pressure medications, specifically some ACE inhibitors that cross the blood-brain barrier. Not all ACE inhibitors behave the same way. Brain-penetrating ACE inhibitors like ramipril and perindopril have actually shown some cognitive protective effects in research, but others may cause fatigue, brain fog, and in some patients, measurable cognitive slowing. The key is knowing which specific ACE inhibitor you're on and how it behaves once it enters the bloodstream. When Carol finally listed out her own 5 medications against this list, 3 of them matched directly. Her nightly Benadryl, her decade-old PPI, her low-dose Xanax. None of these were obscure drugs. They were ordinary, common. The kind nearly every American over 60 has in their cabinet right now. Carol didn't panic, and this part matters because panicking is exactly the wrong response here. She didn't stop a single medication on her own. Instead, that same weekend, she sat at her kitchen table with her daughter and wrote down all 5 of her prescriptions on a single sheet of paper, along with how long she'd been taking each one and why. It was the first time in years anyone had looked at her medications as a complete picture instead of 5 separate, disconnected decisions. She brought that list to her next appointment 2 weeks later. She was nervous walking in, worried her doctor might feel criticized or might brush off her concerns as the kind of internet-driven anxiety doctors hear about constantly. Neither happened. Her doctor looked at the list, set down her pen, and said, "I'm glad you brought this in. Let's go through it properly." Carol asked her 4 specific questions. Questions you can ask too, starting with your very next visit. Question 1. Is any medication I'm currently taking known to cross the blood-brain barrier? Question 2. Is there a hydrophilic or brain-safe alternative that manages my condition equally well? Question 3. Am I on the lowest effective dose? And do I still need every medication on my current list? Question 4. Can we do a medication review, it's sometimes called a polypharmacy review, to check for drug interactions that may be affecting my cognition? That last question turned out to be the most important one Carol asked, and her doctor told her so directly. Most seniors over 60 take 5 or more medications simultaneously, exactly like Carol. The cognitive effects of drug combinations are almost never studied the way individual drugs are studied on their own. Interactions compound the risk in ways a single prescription never reveals by itself. Carol's doctor referred her to a pharmacist for what's called a comprehensive medication review, sometimes also called a brown bag medication review, where you literally bring in a bag of everything you take, prescription and over-the-counter alike. Many insurance plans cover this. Carol's did, and she hadn't even known the service existed before that appointment. The pharmacist spent 45 minutes going through every bottle Carol brought in. The conclusion was clear. Her nightly Benadryl habit and her low-dose Xanax were compounding each other's anticholinergic effects far more than either one alone would explain. The combination was doing more damage than the sum of its parts. Working together, the pharmacist and Carol's doctor replaced the nightly Benadryl with a non-drug sleep strategy, switched her PPI to the lowest effective dose with a plan to taper further over several months, and kept the Xanax Wase, but moved it to a schedule reviewed every few months instead of an open-ended annual refill that nobody ever revisited. None of this happened overnight. It took about 4 months of small, carefully supervised adjustments, one change at a time, with check-ins along the way. But Carol's daughter noticed the change before Carol did. The repeated stories stopped repeating. The keys started staying in the same spot by the door. The conversations got their thread back. Carol could follow a topic from beginning to end again without losing the middle of it. Here's the part of Carol's story that matters most, and it's worth saying clearly because it's the part most people get wrong after watching a video like this. This is not a reason to stop your medications on your own. Not today, not tonight, not before talking to anyone. If you suspect one of your prescriptions is affecting your memory, do not stop taking it abruptly. Several of the medications on this list require a medically supervised taper, sometimes over weeks, sometimes longer. Stopping benzodiazepines or certain blood pressure medications cold turkey can cause dangerous, even life-threatening withdrawal effects. Seizures, dangerous blood pressure spikes, severe rebound anxiety. None of that is worth the risk of trying to fix this on your own. What Carol did right was simple, and it's repeatable by anyone watching this. She brought a written list to a real conversation. She let her doctor and a pharmacist guide every single change, one at a time, with monitoring along the way. Nothing was rushed, nothing was self-managed, nothing was decided in a moment of fear after watching a video and feeling alarmed. That's the model worth taking from her story. Not stopping anything today, starting a conversation today. This video is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Every medication on this list has documented benefits for the conditions it treats. Do not stop or change any prescription medication without consulting your doctor. The goal of this information is to help you ask better questions, not to make decisions without professional guidance. So here's where you are right now. You know the 9 medications most commonly linked to cognitive decline after 60. You know why seniors are more vulnerable than younger adults to begin with. And you have 4 specific questions, the same 4 Carol asked, ready to bring to your own next appointment. Carol's memory isn't perfect today. She still loses a word here and there. That's simply part of being 63, not a crisis. But the steady, frightening slide she was experiencing 2 years ago has stopped. And it stopped not because she fought harder against aging, but because she finally understood what was actually happening in her medicine cabinet. She still does the crossword every morning, in pen, just like she always did. Her daughter says that's the detail that told her things had actually turned around. Not a lab result, not a cognitive test score, just watching her mother pick up a pen with confidence again. Your memory isn't just slipping because of age. Sometimes it's slipping because of what's sitting in a bottle on your bathroom counter. And that, unlike aging itself, is something you can actually address. The next video covers something most people have in their kitchen right now that researchers have directly linked to accelerated brain aging. It's not sugar, it's not alcohol, and it's hiding in foods most people consider healthy. It's right there. Watch it next.